Good afternoon. Please feel free to help yourselves to refreshments throughout. There's cookies and fruit and stuff. So thank you so much for coming today to this session. I really appreciate you making this choice because I know that there are other events going on right now on campus. Sorry. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Vanessa Fabian, who will be making our opening remarks and introducing our keynote speakers. Before I introduce Dr. Fabian, I would like to thank the sponsors of this event and all who helped with the organization of it. So thank you to the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, the Sarah Doyle Women's Center, and the Africana Studies Department for making this event possible. And I would like to personally thank Dr. Diana Fox, Dr. Keisha Khan Perry, Deborah Bowen, Karen Baxter, Neri Garcia, Anna Thomas, Hadia Sewer, and Katsi Rodriguez Valquez for helping in the planning of this event. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Shamara Wiley Al-Hassan, a second year in the Africana Studies Department. And if you are interested in more events of this nature, I would encourage you to attend the talk that's going to be happening with Professor Jerry Augusto, who's in the audience today. It's called Puta Pang. Did I? It's not my talk, it's Lauren Spears' talk. Okay, Lauren Spears' talk. Puta Pang and Kitten, an indigenous view of New England waterways, and that's at 4 o'clock today in Hillel. And there's also going to be a symposium convened by the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society on Thursday and Friday entitled Thinking Earth, Interdisciplinary Conversations on Stewardship of the Commons that you should also check out. Just to let you know the format of the session, we'll hear introductory remarks from Dr. Fabian, then our keynote speakers, Akilah Jaramogi and Dr. Diana Fox will introduce the film entitled Earth, Water, Woman, and then we'll watch the film and have a Q&A session. So, Dr. Vanessa Fabian is a Mellon postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Africana Studies. As a historian and environmental justice scholar, her research focuses on 19th and 20th century African American history and culture, with particular emphasis on religion, gender, and environmental ethics. She examines the development of African Americans' conceptualizations of nature over time and geographical space by interrogating the dominant environmental discourse in the United States and juxtaposing experiences of African Americans against conventional dialogue. She is currently revising her dissertation entitled African American Environmental Ethics, Black Intellectual Perspectives, 1850 to 1965, for publication. Dr. Fabian has truly been an amazing support system and resource for discussing these issues since she's joined us in the Department of Africana Studies. And she will also be giving a talk on her work on Wednesday at 12 at the Center for the Study of Center for Study of Race and Ethnicity in America. So she should go to that event as well. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Vanessa Fabian.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Shamar, for a great introduction. Thank you for coming out once again to this wonderful event. And it's very poignant given the current weather outside that we're talking about rain today, right? In a way, it's kind of like a blessing, and the spiritual forces kind of working with us to show that it is important what we're talking about today. So I would like to introduce Dr. Diana Fox, who is a professor and chairperson at the Department of Anthropology at Bridgewater State University in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Diana Fox is a cultural anthropologist with an expertise in the Anglophone Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. Her research and teaching interests include gender and sexuality studies, ecological and environmental anthropology, feminist ethnography, women's human rights, transnational feminism, anthropology of development and activism, HIV/AIDS stigma, and education and visual anthropology. She is a founder and editor of the open access online journal of International Women's Studies. Her publications include various articles and 2 books, Cultural DNA, Gender at the Root of Everyday Life in Rural Jamaica, and The Challenges of Women's Activism and Human Rights in Africa, edited with the Somali anthropologist Naima Hassi. Since 2004, Dr. Fox has received 3 Fulbright fellowships to teach and to pursue her research in Trinidad and Jamaica. She is executive producer of the documentary film Earth, Water, Woman, Community and Sustainability in Trinidad and Tobago, in conjunction with Sarafina Productions, an LA-based film company. And then I would also like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Akilah Jaramogi. Akilah Jaramogi has a wealth of experience in conservation and community development in St. Anne's, where she lives. Her dedication to building community has taken her to many parts of Trinidad and Tobago. Her dedication to this region, as well as other countries in the region, allows her to share what she has learned with others. Jaramogi is the co-founder and current director of Amandes Community Re-Forestation Project, FACRP, which has been credited with protecting the St. Anne's watershed from major forest fires for the past 10 years. A self-taught craftsperson, Jaramogi has been making jewelry from natural materials for several years, traveling to many countries in the Caribbean for art and craft shows, as well as teaching workshops on using indigenous material to make high-quality jewelry. Jaramogi is the owner of Akilah's Jewelry, under which name her creative jewelry has been available since 1998. She is past co-chair of the Council of the Presidents of the Environment, COPE, co-founder of the Caribbean Artisan Network, president of Trinidad and Tobago Craft Entrepreneur Network, and she currently serves on several environmental and cultural NGO boards in Trinidad and Tobago. Akilah Jaramogi has won many special awards on behalf of FACRP, including the Hummingbird Medal Gold for loyalty and devoted service to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the sphere of community service, 2007. EMA Greenleaf Awards, 2001, 2003, 2007. 15th Caribbean Gift and Craft Show, Best of Show Awards in 2008. BP/AMOCO Leaders Award, Environment in 2000. The Rotary Club Tidy TNT Competition Award, which is in Native Conservation and Best Overall categories in 2003, and Recognition of Honor, Emancipation Support Committee in 2005. So without further ado, I would like to first introduce Dr. Diana Fox, and then we will have our keynote speaker, Akilah Jaramogi.
Well, we just thought today that we would start by sharing a little bit of our background together and how we came to work on the film, and then we'd show the film. So we don't really have a huge amount to say now. We thought we'd show the film, and then that would inspire some questions and discussions. Should I go on, or do you want to? So in 2004, I had a Fulbright to go teach at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago, and I was working on a research project on gender and water. I was looking at the way in which community groups, inspired by women's leadership, were organizing for water democracy. And in Trinidad, not everybody has water all the time. You can turn on your pipes and there can be no water, or you might not even have pipes, and so you have to figure out ways to collect water. So I was going around the country interviewing and working with women who were spearheading these community organization groups. And then I also attended a Caribbean Water Network meeting, and Akilah was sitting in front of me. I love to tell this story because when I was looking at Akilah, she was wearing a beautiful turban and her beautiful earrings, and I wanted to meet her. Her presence was striking and regal, and so after the break, I went and introduced myself, and she invited me to come to her community. She told me she was the director of the Amandes Community Re-Forestation Project and invited me to come. So we did within a week. I came with my little daughter and a graduate student who was working with me, and she gave us a tour of the community, and I was inspired and fascinated and wanted to learn more. So at that point we started to talk, and then one of the things that I did not want to do was to write an article that just went into some obscure journal that nobody read. I felt that the work that they were doing was so significant and so beautiful. You'll see the land and the work in the community is so beautiful that it was important for many people to see. And in addition to that, because I teach visual anthropology and teach about the role of anthropology in creating film, I wanted to actually work on a film that was the product of a partnership. And so that's when we really started to talk. So I'm going to see what Akilah has to say.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, everyone, for the opportunity to be here. And I just want to continue, yeah. And attending that water conference, you know, like I've been to a lot of conferences around Trinidad and around the globe, well, the Caribbean especially. And at that conference, a lot of eyes were on me. And then, well, I noticed Diana and they, because they were like, you know, strangers. And I was saying, why are these people watching me so, you know? And then after break time, they came up and introduced themselves and so on. And that was 2005, and here we are now, 2015, you know, and introducing them to my community. Too, I always look at visitors, you know, one eye open and one eye closed kind of way. That's the Caribbean way we talk. And with concerns like whether they're just coming to take and go and no credits and never acknowledge where they get information from, because over the years, you know, we have experienced a lot of things like that, you know, consultants and students and professors, they come into a community, interview us and so on, and just go with information and never credit us and so on. So I told Diana, I said, I'm willing to share information, but this needs to be like a partnership, a win-win situation for both of us, our community, and for you and your work. And then, you know, we continued talking, and I exposed her to a lot of what we have and some of the stories that I've never shared in my life. I managed to share it in this documentary, and it was really good because for us, it's not just about me, and I always say, I always like to include my community and the doers and the ones that make it happen, you know, and yes, I wanted her to meet the community and meet the youths, and because for us, for me, doing the work at Fonsaman, it's not just about addressing environmental issues, but social issues as well. And the social side is really hard, you know, environmentally, you know, it's easy. I can plant trees, I can plant 1,000 trees, I can do all of that. But transforming lives and changing patterns and going through that whole unlearning process with people, you know, it's really, really hard. I'm not coming from a university, but using the traditional way of doing things, that too even, you know, make it harder, but at the same time, it's really good. And yeah, that is where we work together, and, you know, I welcome the partnership, and I say thanks to all the efforts of Diana and others who contributed to make this happen. Thank you.
Yeah, So we worked with two other people. The beautiful filming that you're going to see in there was done by a woman named Swati. And the company, Serafina Productions, is owned by a colleague, Sarah Feinblum, out in Los Angeles. And we all met, and we all talked with Akilah and the community members. And one of the things that you'll notice in the film is that there's no narrative voice. There's no narrator. And Sarah and Swati kept saying, when are you going to be in the film? I said, I don't want to be in the film. So the idea of the positioning of the anthropologist. What's the relationship between the filmmaker and the community? And how do you position that? And what does it mean in terms of the power dynamic and the nature of the partnership? So we talked a lot about that. So we aimed to create a film that was as collaborative as possible. And we sent back clips once we took 24 hours of footage. And then we sorted through the footage to put pieces together. We sent rough cuts back to view to get input from Akilah and from her daughters. And then we adjusted things. So all along the way, it was interactive with a lot of feedback. So I think without maybe further ado, we'll see the film and then answer further questions.
Yes, we can try. So we would like to open it up for questions that you might have about the film or maybe the making of the film. It was absolutely amazing, so I know we're all taking it in and still digesting it. But if you do have questions, we would love to answer those. Yeah.
Recently, Shamar and I went to Barbados on a research trip, and as we were driving through, across the island, it's really small, as we were driving across the island, the driver was pointing out, all the sort of former cane fields that had been built over with these sort of private, I guess you would call them gated communities and condos, right, which are aimed at foreigners. And so what he was talking about was the way that, number one, the environmental degradation caused by cane harvesting, right? That was pretty evident, but the way that by sort of land development, they managed to, number one, derail from the issue of what kind of damage cane harvesting did, and also erase the history of chattel slavery in Barbados in one fell swoop. So my question is, how can we situate land development not only as a matter of sort of environmental degradation, but also one of historical erasure and silencing, specifically when it comes to the experiences of slavery? And how do you see fighting against land, I guess, development as a dual project of fighting against environmental degradation as well as fighting against a sort of historical erasure of the experiences of slavery?
Press and hold it.
Oh, that's the one.
There's one right behind you.
Yes, I'll try to answer your question as best as I can. In my capacity, I can just share information and continue to share information and continue to work with civil society movements around the region. My last visit to Barbados was at the Assembly of Caribbean Peoples, and I did make a presentation, in terms of the work that we are doing in Trinidad and how the model can be used. For the state, the government of different countries, it's up to them and their mandate as to how they want to really transform their space. So no matter how much you share and no matter how much you tell them, you know, about doing the right things, then it's up to them to make it, you know, part of the agenda, you know, to transform what is happening there. I've seen the sugar estates, sugarcane fields, not just in Barbados, but St. Lucia and Trinidad, again, convert to all kind of craziness right now. Prime agricultural lands are being used to build condos and so on in Trinidad, and we are complaining about it, but then that's the most that we can do. Continue to share information and continue to build awareness and continue to empower community groups and civil society, you know, to put pressure on the state. And that's as much as I can do right now and as much as we're doing right now, FONSAM and other NGOs similar to us.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit to that you saw in the film that there are drum groups, you saw some of the food, you saw a Kwanzaa ceremony and also an Old Year celebration with New Year's in the US. And so FONSAMANS, as a community group, puts cultural revitalization side by side with environmental preservation and sustainability. And so the model that they're generating and teaching is a model that intertwines the importance of cultural preservation, and that is understood to be set against a historical backdrop of erasure. So the importance of the Black Power movement in Trinidad, which inspired Rastafarian movement and the return to the land and the connection with Africa and sustainable living. All those themes are interwoven and brought to bear and part of the consciousness raising that FONSAMANS does. So if, as Carver Bacchus in the film, who's the director of the NGO Sustain TNT, if it is true, as he says, that these kinds of projects are the future of the region, then what is meant specifically by that is not planting trees alone, but developing programming for children, for students of all levels, for the community members, that integrates cultural revitalization at multiple stages with environmental protection. So you have to start with one group and branch outward, and it's a huge task because you're fighting against the power of the state that's influenced by the IMF and the World Bank and their lending programs, but that's the work that's being done.
Yeah, but Dora, you raise a very important question. And part of what you're discussing, what you're asking, is this question of how our society views human beings and human life. Because there is a direct relationship, a direct correlation between the degradation of the land and the dehumanization of people. And when we look at chattel slavery and the way it's established here in the United States, it's a part of our U.S. Constitution. And in fact, it's a racial contract, and Charles Mills talks about that in his book, The Racial Contract. And it's this idea, this notion that the African body, the black body, is by definition valuable, not only because it's human, but part because of its labor and its ability to produce increased labor, future labor. And part of the issue with that is that we have allowed ourselves to view the natural environment as something that is that can be exploited, as opposed to something that is sacred or something that should be protected. And part of that relationship that is within our Constitution, within our American society, becomes a part of how we view human beings. And so what you're discussing, this erasure of chattel slavery with the deforestation, is in part this larger issue that's occurring not only here in the United States, but also in the Caribbean, and we see that ideology and these practices becoming a part of these societies through colonialism and that colonialist ideologies.
This afternoon. So I kind of want to get your feedback on a situation that we have happening in St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands right now, where like 2/3 of the island belongs to the national park, and therefore the cost of land increases so dramatically that dispossession and gentrification happens at a very rapid rate. And so the two discourses that are kind of competing are A, preservation and ecological sustainability has to happen in a way where local people are removed from this space, or overdevelopment is the inevitable outcome because of global capitalism. And so I've been trying to have conversations about, well, how do we present a third model, but not only present it, how do we believe that it's actually feasible, and understand then that ecological preservation can happen with cultural and human preservation without, preserving the landscape, but then having that landscape only be useful to predominantly white tourists or expats on island.
So the question is, how do you create a third model and make that model viable and believable?
To me, needs to start with the people themselves, And again, when I say people, civil society and communities and families and so on. And when I go there, trying my best to empower, people for change, especially environmental change, I start with individuals, I say you can make a difference, you can look within yourself and start appreciating your natural environment, and from there you can just, be that model. Start with your home, then your community, then get into the schools, and then get into the NGOs and CBOs and the churches and so on. And then eventually you'll be able to convert a minister or somebody, one of the decision makers to buy into the package. And this is what I've been doing over the years, Sometimes it's really hard to get the attention of a minister or the prime minister or some area rep or something. And I just start, I end up meeting his children at the school, and the information end up reaching in his home, and then I'll get a call or email, or he will come on a tour with his children. That's a minister or somebody, and then eventually it will get, within parliament, So bit by bit, but again, it's just to be consistent with, the effort of trying to convert, people, or trying to let people become aware of the importance of loving and appreciating your natural environment. Because by loving your natural environment, you love self, So, as the young man said, the earth can do without us, but we can do without, the earth. So, again, looking at St. John's, yeah. We did some work. Normally when I'm writing the BVI there, I will be selling my jewelry, but at the same time I talk environment and so on. And over there I really see the need for more education around the environment, because it's a whole set of a lot of people are re-stimulated, especially Caribbean people are re-stimulated around the land and agriculture and so on, coming out of that slavery period. And now, yes, they grow up, and all the university students and all of them, they get too posh to go out in the bush and, and connect, So again, it's encouraging all these colors to live it, manifest it. You have the information, then execute it now, and be consistent with it. Don't do it for style or for a project, and after that, everything is over. So for me to be consistent with it, with caring and loving, is to start nurturing the little ones. So I prepare packages for little ones, I prepare packages for big ones. I start with the preschoolers. I sing it. This is our earth you need to survive. Let's plant some trees and keep them alive. Have them clap and sing, and I write jingles, and, you know, and get them to embrace the information and let it be natural. And then things will change, I'm sure. It will, but we need help, you know, from all over. So that is why partnership is so important and networking is so important. And I appreciate, you know, the partnership of Diana and all of you who are willing to come on board to help, you know, share the information, execute it as well. Thanks.
Yeah, you definitely raise a very important question, because here in the United States, when we look at the conservation movement, and when we look at between 1850 and 1920, the way we look at preserving the natural environment is protecting it from the natural environments protecting it from human beings. But the reality is the traditional white discourse, white environmentalists, are protecting the natural environment from others, from people of color, and claiming the land, the most pristine landscape for themselves. And so the question becomes, how do we reframe that discourse so that we put our experiences, our narratives in that larger discussion, so that it's not about protecting the natural environment from human beings. First, we need to question how human beings are using the natural environment to could perpetuate these power dynamics that marginalize certain sectors of the society, particularly people of color. And one of the ways that this discourse becomes very important is also in environmental justice. It's a movement that's really taking at the heart of it. It's looking at introducing and maintaining the social justice aspect as an important part of the discussion of environmental history. And so one of the more grounded ways to look at it, for instance, would be to look at, and more historically current, would be to look at the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, where civil rights activists, you know, when we think about Martin Luther King and his initiatives, one of the things he did when he went into Chicago was to organize the sanitation workers. And he discussed how his first experience going into Chicago, looking at the high rises and looking at the congestion, looking at the large amounts of rats, the small amounts of public green spaces, and how that demoralized the community. And he said himself that he was concerned about having his family there, because just the lack of green space and the lack of clean space, he felt would decrease the morale among his family and himself, you know, as well. And you know, one of the things that they did was to ask for more public green spaces, and actually critique how the restructuring and the racial restrictive covenants were causing African Americans and other communities of color to be located, particularly in small amounts of spaces that were congested. So what we're seeing and what we're discussing also is this issue of having people in spaces that they're not naturally occurring spaces. They are created by these racially motivated interests that create spaces where people of color are in harm's way at the expense of creating more pristine and posh spaces for other sectors of society.
I guess what I would add to that, these important contributions, is that change has to happen at multiple levels simultaneously and at different times. So we have to start with the hard work of communities and children, cultivating that feeling that John Stolmeyer was talking in the film of imagining the trees and the waters as your families. That has to start young, and you have to have the local community efforts. And then there are people who are visionaries, who can, in their minds, imagine these new kinds of shared spaces that can be constructed in communities. And then there are those who are driven to be policy initiators and to once the link is created with the minister's children, to then work with the minister. So I think that conceptualizing change at multiple levels and drawing on talent that can develop action plans around a vision and then enacting those. That when I can understand how change takes place, I think about it at those multiple levels. And because people have different skills, artists who can paint murals that depict a new kind of community relationship. Or there's a movement going on in Kingston now in Jamaica, mural, street painting, mural art. And those paintings are powerful. They're, sorry, I have laryngitis. They're community groups working with children in schools to design images that evoke transformation, a sense of a future, in spaces that are that seem to be the least likely spaces for those kinds of things. And so not just change at multiple levels, but different kinds of change and different kinds of skills that are employed toward that change.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm just curious, how does, thank you, by the way, for what you do. How does success look like to you? And when do you envision that happening?
Success, measuring success. For me, measuring success is not just about like amount of money and all the stuff and things like that, but
basically, like what you do, like the environment.
Yes, environmental success is, like for me, to measure that is looking at my community and how the people and changes around my community. And for sure I can see success happening because right now, you know, the way my community, you know, look at their natural environment is totally different from 10 years ago. And when I look at the forest, when we started, it was like just almost like a desert. The vegetation there was like just grass and bamboo. And over the years, it's over 60,000 seedlings we have planted. We have reduced erosion from the hillside. We have been able to encourage, you know, wildlife, create that habitat for wildlife. The quality of water improved. And again, we have been able to reach thousands of young people, you know. So I would say we are on the path, and on a scale from 1 to 10, we are like 8.5. You know, so, and again, measuring success is looking at, for me, looking at my children. And post Akilah, I know the work will continue because they are quite capable of treading the path that myself and Takuma created and to carry on the work to a different level. So again, I would say, yes, we are getting there. But now is to win the hearts of the decision makers fully. We have received a lot of national awards and so on, but with politics and everything in the game, you know, it's still to win the hearts of the leaders and the politicians and so on, to really look at what we are doing and to declare the area as a protected area. And that is when I would say, yes, you know, I can truly hold, you know, something in my hand and say, no one can cut down trees 100 years from now. No one can, you know, bulldoze a place or run members of our community off the land and so on. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons we worked on the film, to create a a sense of, and if the room had been darker, you'd be able to see a little bit more of the striking beauty of the landscape. But as the film is shown throughout Trinidad and Tobago and the region, to generate a sense of connectedness to that space, so that the film itself we see as a kind of a provocation, an activist, a tool to generate a commitment to a preserve. And it's a preserve, obviously, with people, which follows this new model that we're seeing around the world. In South Africa, for example, San people of the Kalahari who were kicked out of, the forest, the desert, have recently returned because of these new models of that recognize that flora and fauna and human beings co-evolved. Right?
I just wanted to comment and say that I'm genuinely very, very impressed with the work that you're doing in Trinidad and Tobago. One thing is for us to kind of talk about it and theorize it. Another thing is to see people actually doing the work and living it in its truest form. So I really, really appreciate it. And I also learned quite a bit watching the film. One is in Jamaica, going to Jamaica recently, you realize all the rivers that you knew growing up and you swam in and you caught, crawfish and shrimp and all those other things, that they're all dried up, right? And you wonder why and how, and people make all kinds of excuses. But one is that there's this human kind of participation in destroying the land and the water and so forth, but that also we could play a part in actually rebuilding and recreating a new kind of environment for us to kind of live and enjoy and actually partake in as human beings. And in kind of adding on to the conversation from earlier on, I think oftentimes the discourse even around kind of land or territorial rights and preservation is oftentimes around not for us to kind of live on the land as well as to build trees and preserve the rivers and so forth. So I think this idea of rebuilding the land and as well as kind of living on the land, I think is really quite impressive. I have to say, just genuinely impressed by the kind of work that you're doing. And I think it even goes back to the point that Vanessa Fabian made about, it's about valorization of the environment, but also the valorization of Black lives in the diaspora. So I also wanted to just ask you to just to comment briefly just about, facing all these challenges and that global capitalism is real and that, people's greed, financial greed is real. What are some of the challenges you see moving forward, but also what keeps you going amidst all the challenges, the violence, and we all know that's all integral to that. So again, truly, truly, genuinely impressed, but also understanding that there must be some challenges, and how do you stay inspired to keep on doing the work?
Okay. Yes, there are challenges, and there will always be challenges. And it's just for me, the individual, to understand how to work around those challenges and work around situations as they come. So I would say Rastafari first, my strength, and being a Rasta woman in the hills there, when I can't take them, I unplug. I just go deeper in the mountains and I just shut off and I just pray, I cry, I get my strength, I call on my ancestors, because too I respect the Orisha faith as well, along with Rastafari, Nyabingi, and it's that two all black and white oppressors standing for Nyabingi, and so on, and I stick to my beliefs and I believe in myself, and when I feel like everything is so hard, I go into the hills and go into myself, and I make things happen, and when I come out, I just see changes, and really, really believing in yourself and connecting with the Creator is very, very important, even for the children. So when things seem to be really tough, that's where I'm really quiet, and then things just change. You just get a call and hear somebody on your side, you know. And being situated in a suburban community, the Prime Minister's house is just lower down the road, and everybody is looking at, okay, one lot of land at Fonsuman is 1.5 million TT, you know. The value of 125 acres of land, everybody's looking at, you know. However, I just stay cool and I just do what I have to do in a powerful way, let my ancestors and the gods just take charge and do it for me. And also the power of networking. It's a very, very powerful tool. And because I've developed partnership with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people around the globe, I'm a member of the Slow Food International Movement in Italy. We have Diana Fox and her team. I'm a member of Canary, Caribbean Agriculture Resource Institute, Council of Presidents for the Environment, Sustain TNT, I'm on the advisory board. You know, so I network with a lot of doers, you know. And if I feel overwhelmed or challenges in my way, I don't even have to call. They would call and they would come in. And as a woman in a male-dominated field, especially forestry, you know, sometimes they tend to feel that I'm really soft, but when I'm out there and I have to really stand up, I stand up for myself and I break all barriers. I go to all levels, you know, and I'm not afraid to approach a prime minister or a president or a diplomat or ambassador or whatever, you know, because I am there and I just show myself as a powerful giant, you know, a powerful Rasta woman in one sense, and I don't ever give up. But part of the struggle is being consistent. You know, you don't start a struggle and just fall weak, you know. So that's why when they said after Takuma passed, all the relatives and my mom and everybody, child, come out of the bush. Sorry, you know. And you know, and I said, no, I'm staying here and I want to continue the work. You know, I have 6 children, 3 finished university at a certain level. They still want to do their masters and all this stuff. But I want them to stay around as well. 5 of them passed through, you know, some of the best colleges in Trinidad. And as a single parent, I continue to do what I'm doing, you know, and continue to be a light in my own little way. And I think it's mainly because you're consistent in the struggle. That is where the respect, you know, lies. That is where people get to really understand and appreciate and notice. It's not just about greed and land grabbing and whatever, but when you can measure success, you can measure the work done, you know, you can measure how many lives have been transformed just coming to Fonsuman. You know, sometimes I'm at the airport and I see big men call me, Mr. Jaramogi. I say, okay, you know. And they would tell me they're now back from university in Jamaica studying, you know, geography, and they remembered, you know, times at Fonsuman, you know, as a young person. And now, the stage we're at now, looking to set up this field school in Trinidad, I think it's really, really something I'm looking forward to, and to share the model around the region. So I'm quite optimistic and sure that it will happen, because we already entertain a lot of students, thousands of students come to Fonsuman. But again, with the input of others, I know it will, you know, be a great success, and I'm looking forward to that, yeah.
Field school, but an interdisciplinary field school. And some of the fees that the students would pay to come would contribute to the ongoing work of Fonds Amandes. And so that would be a seed, and then other schools, other students from other places might be able to come and participate. So that's what Akilah and I are working on now as our next step.
I wanted to thank you as well, and to build a bit on the remarks by Professor Fabian and Professor Perry. I think sometimes we have a problem when we're at university of looking for a theoretical or conceptual frame for things and trying to fit them into a conceptual or theoretical frame. But one of the things that I find most important about what you are doing is that, for me, that is a theoretical frame. That is a set of ideas and practices. So, for example, the way that you talk about, and the people in the film talked about being and doing, they are enunciating, they're talking about ideas of nature. And you can't get any more fundamental or philosophical when you're dealing with human beings than people expressing their ideas of nature. And an idea of nature that evidently includes human beings and isn't about pristine, untouched by man, which of course there aren't anymore on the earth and haven't been for 1 million years, for as long as human beings have been here. The kind of, it's not an anti-philosophy, but a different philosophy, set of ideas about nature, about human beings roles within nature. And then also in your practices, I can see, give it a fancy name, what some people call civic epistemology. That community is creating, as it does things, knowledge about that piece of earth and those waters, and a set of practices, which is why when you say you network to people, of course, absolutely you do, because you are creating a way of civic engagement or a way of engagement with power. Also in those ideas, it's inherent that you have an understanding of the human history of that part of the land. So I want to thank you, because I could see that one would use the film, and even more the visit to the place, as an exercise in thinking about ideas about nature and being human.
So we'll take about 3 more questions, and then...
Hi, thank you very much for the film and the discussion. So in talking about just the reframing, you know, when there's a discussion about power over versus power with. So a lot of the work that you're doing is the power with the community, and kind of pushing back against the power over the environment by, you know, those that want to utilize the land and who look at land and people and bodies for exploitation for their own benefit, meaning those developers and people who are using the pristine land. So I also want to tie in the idea around deforestation. And lots of people don't know that deforestation is a large part of the reason for the Ebola epidemic. And so it seems, so these, you know, tying these into global issues, looking at environmental justice and understanding how they're a part of it, because it then goes back to how we, not us, but, you know, people who are exploiting the land and exploiting people are, you know, part of this process that we're trying to stop. So I just wanted to give, I don't see a lot of the connection, and other than people who might know a bit about the fact that, you know, the outbreak does have to do with fruit bats and their dislocation from the rainforests for palm oil plantation crops. But then it gets blamed on those people, you know, and their culture and their inability to govern themselves. So but I haven't seen the tie between the Environmental Justice League and those kind of issues. And I'm wondering, since a lot of what you're doing is talking about deforestation, and so it's the same pattern. I don't mean to ramble because I'm trying to pull the ideas together, but the idea of, again, the looking at land as something that is for you to exploit, that is for you to use, instead of seeing that it's for us to be together with. So that's where I want to talk about that difference in framing of power over and power with. Does that work for you guys? It's not all together, but. Yeah, I know.
Well, one of the things, yeah, that is a very important question that you raised, because one of the issues that I was actually talking with one of the students here is that corporations will go into different countries and they will, go in and collect samples and come back to their native countries and then get a patent on that particular plant, and then go back to that country and create in other words, they'll stop the indigenous population from being able to go back into that particular space on grounds that they use it to create medicines and drugs for pharmaceutical companies in these other countries. And the issue with that is several, in that one, you inevitably take away the power of that particular indigenous population to ever use that land during that patent. And it really makes no sense if you think about it, that one country can go into another country and say to the indigenous population, you cannot use that particular space because we now have a patent on it and a law on it in our country. I mean, it makes no sense when you think about it logically. And also the issue becomes when they tear down these natural spaces and the deforestation, of course we're creating these shortages in vaccinations and medicines for these diseases that we had remedies for, natural remedies for, that these indigenous populations were using and making long before, we knew about it, but it's just something that we did not know about. And so the issue is many-fold in what you're talking about. And environmental justice activists are looking at that issue. It tends to be more of a transnational issue, but it's a very important one indeed.
Not sure if this is sort of what you're getting at, but what your comments make me think about is the Akilah's emphasis on the importance of networking, and also your comment about movements. We tend to think about movements as discrete: the environmental movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the indigenous peoples movement. And then when we see a particular individual or a group of individuals who meet multiple categories of that, we say that the environmental, women's, civil rights movement are intersecting, but that's not really how it is. What it is that you have new movements that are themselves intersectional because they incorporate multiple facets of liberation. And I think that there are movements of this nature all over the globe. And in my thinking, the only way to combat the enormous power of these corporations is to develop these global networks and to see movements rather than as discrete, as interconnected, and to build these and to re-articulate movements as intersectional in their nature. So when I get weighted down, I do some of what Akilah does, but I also, there's a wonderful journal called Orion. It's an environmental journal. And there's a new book also that I've been reading called The Power of the Talking Stick. The talking stick is a Mi'kmaq, Nova Scotian native term for a symbolic stick that is passed around in a circle when people are talking and sharing ideas. When you have the stick, everybody else has to listen. And the call is to listen to Indigenous voices, to listen to the voices globally that are from communities that are experiencing these losses of land. And so I think that these transnational connections across movements that will help us to reconceptualize movements is one way to think through an approach to this challenge.
Hi, it's me again. I have one more question. So my question is about when we talk about movement building, in my mind, I can't necessarily talk or think about movement building without thinking about militancy. And so there's a way in which certain kinds of militancy are given credit and others are sort of discredited, particularly when it comes to environmental activism. And so we see sort of white environmental activists like chaining themselves to like whaling boats and doing all kinds of sort of apparently militant acts, whereas Indigenous communities you see like in the Cochabamba water wars and what happened with Idle No More in Canada, right? You see other kinds of militancy either not being read as environmental militancy and being discredited as just disgruntled brown people, right? And so I'm wondering, and also the way that the framing of militancy just reinscribes the idea of white settlers as being natural stewards and protectors of the land, right? So I'm just wondering, what is the role of militancy in the sort of educational initiative that you are presenting?
For me in Trinidad, I've seen environmentalists do things like, like one was trying to get the government not to do a highway, and he decided to go on a hunger strike for days and for months and so on, and we watched his body deteriorate and ministers making fun of him and all the stuff and things like that, The militant approach for me, I have different tactics. I have different ways of, addressing situations. And for the companies and so on, like when I see them, like when they're about to cut down large portions of lands to do development and so on, or to reduce forests to put up big buildings and so, we find ways to protest, not by burning tires or stuff. We do silent protests, do placards and stuff, and get columnists, journalists and so on to write, articles in the newspaper. We use the radio call-in programs, and, we get people to, voice their opinion there and so on. But also we talk a lot about green economy and under corporate social responsibility, like what they're supposed to do, what is ethically right, and so on when it comes to the environment. So there are different ways that we do it. We get the message across, but for me, my body is sacred, so I don't like chaining up. I don't like police beating me. I don't like nobody hitting me, and so is my children. I really don't like nobody roughing us up and insulting us and hitting, and I don't burn tires and pollute in that way to get my message across. I have different ways and means of getting things done, And somehow, because I'm centered around St. Anne's, which is a really high-end community, St. Anne's, Cascade, Marval kind of way, those who know Trinidad well, where the Prime Minister and President and everybody is right there. I tend to get the attention of journalists and so on my side. So I use the media as a powerful tool to get my information across. I can just call a journalist, call them in, get an interview, let them put it out. I know what time on the news to get attention, just before noon or so, or I will know when Parliament is in sitting and we do a silent protest walking around Parliament, you know, things like that I would do in Trinidad, yeah, to get information across in that, you know, way, yeah. But other than that, I have others to do it for me as well, you know, so I just shield myself from attacks and, yeah, I find different ways to preserve myself from, you know, guns coming at me, yeah. I don't know if that answered your question well.
I just really want to thank the panel so much for sharing your knowledges with us today. And if there's any last comments that you want to make before we wrap up the session.
I just wanted to let those of you who are remaining here know that so Akilah has a display of her jewelry, but I'm also having an open house at my home on Saturday evening at 7 p.m. If you want to come by and if you're interested in looking at the jewelry she makes from the seeds of the Fonds of Men's Forest, and all proceeds go back to the community. 46 Elton Street, E-L-T-O-N, 7 o'clock. Feel free to bring friends and come on by. Thank you for hosting us.
Just want to say special thanks to Samara for giving me the opportunity to be here, and the university and all you beautiful people. I am looking forward to continue, you know, this relationship, and please don't let it be, okay, I remember this moment and that's it, you know. Again, consistency is the key to solving any situation. You know, you got to be consistent in the struggle, and, you know, so we can measure from then to now, you know. You come to Trinidad, plant a tree, measure your carbon footprint, reduce it by doing something green, you know, and this is what we encourage. And, you know, we need support all around. You need support and we need support, so let's do it for the betterment of Mama Earth, you know. So I just want to say thanks and praises for this opportunity. Yeah, thanks.
You can find Fonds of Men's Community Reforestation Project if you Google it, and on Facebook, and you can friend, and that's one way that you can follow along and see what's happening in the community.
Shamara, I just have one quick question. Is this part of our library? Yes. It is, okay, perfect. Okay, great, because we definitely have to incorporate in our classrooms. Akilah, I just wanted to say thank you for being such an inspiring person and for the inspiring work that you do, because so many times we get these images in the media that show activists as being this, these certain kinds of models, and the reality is it's people, ordinary people doing extraordinary things every day that make extraordinary changes. And I think that's what the real activism, and that's what makes a person really special in the work that they do. And so I just want to thank you for being inspiring to me, and I'm sure to so many other people. And Diana, thank you for, you know, showcasing her voice and the voice of the people who are doing the work. It's really great to see how anthropology and to see how academia really works in correlation with the everyday movement and making it something that's real, right? And so I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for that, and to Shamara for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Thank you, Shamara, and for the university. Thank you to everyone who has come and joined us today.
So please join me in giving this panel a round of applause.